The national grants have been in the news a little bit lately, as you may have noticed. The humanities get 1/20th of 1% of federal national grants, more or less.
You are stealing my speech.
Preaching big part. And it is, you know, it's like a Rodney Dangerfield, right? I get no respect. And then return to culture sometimes, and humanities in the academy, again, you feel like I get no respect. But there are ways in which we can advocate for ourselves to a variety of publics so that they understand what we do, why it's vital, and why we should be doing this kind of work. Here to help us with that is Paula Krebs, who's the Executive Director of the Modern Language Association, the largest organization of the humanities with 24,000 members from more than 100 countries. Her role includes national advocacy work for the humanities and humanities education. She's written on higher education and humanities issues in the Chronicle, and Inside Higher Ed, CNN, the Washington Post, Slate, and other publications. And she serves on the board of the National Humanities Alliance. She is by training and by inclination a Victorianist, with a doctorate in 19th century British literature and culture from Indiana University. And she was an English professor and department chair at Wheaton College in Massachusetts and dean of the College of Humanities and Social Sciences at Bridgewater State University. Please, and her first time here in the desert Southwest and loving it. So we hope to have her back again. And please give her a warm Sun Devils welcome.
Thank you, Sun Devils. Good afternoon. Thanks very much for coming out today, trying to decide if I need the readers or not. As Ron said, I'm the Executive Director of a disciplinary association, the Modern Language Association. But I'm also the President of the National Humanities Alliance. I'm a member of the Executive Directors Group of the ACLS, the American Council of Learned Societies. I'm a board member at the Center for Research Libraries and some other stuff. So I have a number of different perspectives on the humanities from which I'll be speaking today. These are remarkable times for higher education. The threats that have been building in recent years at the state level, ideological diversity, legislation, anti-DEI, and anti-trans regulations, and general hostility toward higher education's core work in creating critical and thoughtful members of local, regional, and national communities. And now in the last 3 weeks or so, an explosion of attempts to cripple research, access, and any attempt to equip students with the analytical skills they need to understand the world around them. This is the context in which we have to examine how and how much the U.S. supports the study of language, literature, writing, and culture. When I first started thinking about this topic for this talk, I focused on the place of humanities research in the nation's sense of what is and isn't important. And I'm going to talk about that. But the nation's refusal to recognize and fund humanities research now sits in relation to a new refusal to fund scientific research as well. And in relation to a refusal to support not only humanities research, but the study of the humanities, or the study of anything, really, these days. All that's in the context of an explicit and systematic racism from the federal government, the likes of which we have not seen in decades. Explicit, systematic racism. The Department of Education, as you probably know, has terminated contracts and halted work for the Institute of Education Statistics. That might not mean a lot to you, but that's the Department of Education's research arm. Those are the folks who tell us about graduation rates and enrollments and employment. IPEDS data, if you've ever used that, it's all shut down. There's nothing left for federal education research. The administration is attempting to cap the indirect cost rate, IDC, for NIH grant recipients at 15%, You probably saw that in the news. A federal judge has temporarily blocked that, but we'll see. If those grants, NIH grants, can no longer pay all the costs to sustain their research, that what indirect cost rates fund is, the lights and the heat and the administrative staff, not the lab mice. Those are covered by the direct grant. If they can't find a way through their NIH grants to support that, the universities are going to have to find another way to pay for it. I worry that way will involve tuition increases, bigger class sizes, cuts in other areas. We know what other areas means. Students are going to suffer. Access to higher education will decrease, especially for those with limited means. And the entire nation is going to be worse off. It's not the universities they're punishing. That's the way they phrase it. It's the community, the economy, the polity in general that's being targeted here. Critical thinking is targeted. In the humanities, we're seeing direct impact on research from the new administration. Not that the administration funds much humanities research, but what it does fund is being impacted. There are dramatic new restrictions on what the NEH will fund. I don't know if you've taken a look at this, if anybody of you have looked at a NOFO lately, a Notice of Funding Opportunity from the NEH. There are prohibitions on research that can be seen as involving, I will quote here, promotion of a particular political, religious, or ideological point of view, promotion of gender ideology, promotion of discriminatory equity ideology, support for diversity, equity, and inclusion, or diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility initiatives or activities, and environmental justice initiatives or activities. All of these are prohibited now for NEH grant applications. What will enforcement, now this comes after the previous administration's guidelines for NEH grants, which actually asked for a lot of that stuff in them, as do NSF grants. Maybe NIH, I've never seen those. What will enforcement of these prohibitions look like? How does one apply for funding, for example, to conduct an institute for educating college and university faculty members? Okay, NEH institutes. This is how they are described in the NEH's application. They are to deepen and enrich the understanding of significant topics in the humanities and enrich their teachers' capacity for effective scholarship and teaching. That's what they're supposed to be for. So how are you supposed to do an institute that does that if the very instructions for applying for that institute make it impossible to do that? If you mention wanting to help teachers create curricula that'll help them reach learners who've been left behind, will that be judged as discriminatory equity ideology? If you want to build teachers' skills in reaching out to, for example, Black male students to help them improve graduation rates, which stricture does that violate? Gender ideology or support for diversity, equity, and inclusion? Would a workshop on making one's classroom materials accessible fall afoul of the prohibition against support for diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility initiatives or activities? So the context for what I'm talking about today is a federal government that is actively trying to destroy a lot of what we do. The study of language, literature, and culture, however, is thriving on many campuses. I'm gonna start, and here, you guys are holding steady in some departments, up a little in some, down a little in some, but it's not awful here in humanities enrollments. Yay, you. Seriously. I'm going to start with our place within interdisciplinary initiatives, because, again, you guys specialize in that as well. And the interdisciplinary research and community engagement that's happening on this campus is amazing, and it has been for years. You make sure that the humanities are at the center of initiatives. That's what's key. The center of initiatives on environmental stuff, gun culture, climate futures, race and democracy, the desert, humanities right there in there. In other settings, though, I worry about interdisciplinary initiatives that appear to start from a topic that is scientific or technical, environmental or tech or whatever, but they start from there They bill themselves as interdisciplinary, but that doesn't mean they include the humanities. Okay. A few years ago, I went to DC for the launch of a publication from the National Academies of Science, Engineering, and Medicine. It was called Branches from the Same Tree, the Integration of the Humanities and Arts with Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine in Higher Education. And as soon as I figure out how to advance my slides, I will show you. Come on, baby. There we go. You can see my PowerPoint skills are not strong, but that's the cover of the book from that initiative. So I'm at this event, Branches from the Same Tree. They're a bit literal there at the academies, okay? There was a big poster presentation of various interdisciplinary projects connected to the academies. And I went around the exhibit and I looked at all the posters. I'm getting used to looking at posters. It's a good thing. There were projects with physics and dance, and music composition and math and chemistry and creative writing. But in every single poster, every single one of them, the non-STEM partner was a creative art and not a humanities initiative. Nothing analytical, nothing interpretive at all. There was no understanding of the value of the humanities for these projects. It was depressing. So I want to focus today on humanities expertise, on what language and literature and culture bring to interdisciplinary work, and on what they bring to post-graduation employment and what they bring to the nation. We can't, for example, talk about environmental studies without examining the ways we as humans in individual and community interact with each other and the world around us. How we do it, why we do it, how we talk and write about how we do it. These are questions that call for humanistic analysis, not scientific or even social scientific, although we overlap. We all have noted what happens when science gets out ahead of culture, whether it's in relation to climate change, or vaccines, or dinosaur DNA. Okay? Come on, let's have a bigger laugh than that. Come on. The hell with it. All right. Part of my job is making the case for the value of the humanities. Humanities coursework, especially beyond the first or second course, cultivates humanities thinking. Okay? That stays with us for life. Humanities thinking, shorthand for interpretive, reflective, synthetic, analytical approaches in which the humanities trains us, especially in language and literature fields, but also in philosophy, history, religious studies, and other humanities fields. The ability to construct and weigh arguments, the ability to change your mind based on evidence and on other people's arguments, the ability to examine deeply conflicting points of view without defaulting to the one that hews most closely to the one you brought to the table, the ability to understand that other cultures are not lesser cultures and that language is intertwined with culture. The humanities are building blocks for lives and not simply credentials for the first job. But students don't necessarily know all those things. Okay? And they can't talk about the value of all those things unless we make clear what they are when we are teaching them, unless we assess and measure their acquisition, unless we give students ways to document them. There is nothing morally compromising about making clear to students that they are acquiring skills in our classrooms, in our minors and our majors. It does students a disservice to teach as if all you were teaching were subject area mastery. If they leave your class thinking all they've learned is Jane Eyre, you've missed a lot of opportunities. In our fields, we focused a lot on what the major gives students. But we also need to focus on what the minor provides and even the course. Because without convincing students of the value of the individual course and then the add-on value of a couple of courses, or a minor and then a major, we're never going to get to the major. We all need to be recruiters for our fields at the individual course level. Our students are going to get many different kinds of jobs and end up in many different kinds of careers, and those are, of course, not the same thing. I'm going to talk a little about what we can do to help that and what resources there are to help. For example, Norton has been doing some work on showing the possibilities, has a very lovely poster which is way too small, but you can look it up and I can give you the link, on what you can do with an English major. Think of these as all jobs. You can't see what the jobs are, but there are tons of them. So anyway, Norton gives that out for free. Get it, put it on your wall. Eric Hayo and his colleagues at Penn State offer a series of posters called Humanities Works. This is a sample of one of them, myth, reality stuff. And the National Humanities Alliance has a ton of resources as well. Let me back up, I've jumped ahead too much. The path for humanities graduates is not, I will get to this, ignore that, okay, look at me. The path for humanities graduates is not straightforward, and that's what's scary for parents and maybe scary for students. But the path for other graduates isn't straightforward either. And that's what nobody recognizes, okay? They just think it's straightforward. Okay. As you can see from the underemployment numbers, which are actually a later slide, I'm out of order. Biology majors, I'll show you the underemployment numbers in a bit. Biology majors are not graduating into biology jobs. They aren't. Okay. Psychology majors are not becoming psychologists. You know that. A BA and, or a BS even in psychology is not going to get you a job as a psychologist. They are not, they think if it has ist at the end, biologist, psychologist, they're going to get a job. That doesn't work that way any more than you become an Englishist, or a Frenchist. Okay. Yet parents, perhaps especially parents of first-gen college students, may think that that's what leads you to a job, is the ist majors. I'm going to tell a story. When I was dean of, it won't back up. When I was dean of Humanities and Social Sciences at a regional comprehensive institution, I was very frustrated that my faculty members seemed to think that any result other than graduate school for their students was a bit of a failure. If their student got a job in something that they didn't think they were training the student for, then they maybe had failed as a faculty member. And this was really upsetting to me. I called together a bunch of hiring managers from the local healthcare conglomerate, South Coast Health. And they all came in, there was like 7 of them, in 7 different divisions. And I brought a bunch of humanities faculty together, and the managers, the healthcare managers, talked about the kinds of jobs they had for entry-level people with a bachelor's degree. And they talked about tons of different jobs, patient advocate and billing whatever, and lots of different kinds of jobs, communication. Okay. Not a single one of the jobs they mentioned involved a scalpel, which was handy for the audience. Okay. All of them a humanities major could have walked into. And then the faculty members talked about what they thought their students could do as a result of the major, what they had learned in the major. And I'm focusing on majors now. And the faculty members were astonished at what they heard from the managers. The managers were astonished at what they heard from the faculty members. A philosophy major does that? A history major can do that? I mean, they just had never had the conversation with each other. And the problem was the faculty members had a little trouble with the notion of an entry-level job. Right? Your entry-level job was probably assistant professor, right? That's not what our students start at. And so I talked to recruiters from Enterprise Rent-A-Car, right? The number one, employer of bachelor's degree holders in the country, and recruiters from CVS, which was a big recruiter in our area because they're based in Southeast New England. And all of them said, the problem with the humanities majors is their faculty members think they're a failure if they take a job with us. If you start with CVS, your first job with CVS with a bachelor's degree is managing a store. Okay? So you're the number one, undergraduate in your English department at Bridgewater State and the faculty thinks you are hung the moon, you are the best, and then you tell them you took a job managing at CVS, that is not a success for them. Even if 10 years later, you are running, a whole division of CVS, you had to take that first job to get there, but it's very hard for us in higher ed to think about possible branching directions for our students. Sorry about that lateral move. Students from all kinds of majors will have very winding paths, and our job is to help prepare them for the first few steps while building the foundation for the long haul. Okay? To do that, we don't have to become career counselors. I'm not asking you to become a career counselor, okay? But we do have to orient ourselves a little bit differently. When I was a dean, a whole bunch of us from a bunch of different institutions in the area, R1s and community colleges and small liberal arts colleges, I got a bunch of us together from those schools to talk about naming and measuring and documenting the kinds of skills that students were getting from humanities courses. And just left it up to the different people. We did small groups, people tried to figure out ways they could do that. And one thing that came out of it was, so I'm at Bridgewater State, right? This is a small liberal arts college, and a local community college, Bristol Community College, and then Wheaton College, small liberal arts college, all within 20 minutes of each other. They all decided they would do the same exercise. Last 20 minutes of a class in the last week of the semester, everybody went up to the whiteboard and they said, all right, I want you to tell me everything you learned in this class that was not the subject matter of the class. Anything you learned to do, anything, way you changed, anything new that you're taking away from this class. And everybody wrote it down. They were not allowed to respond. They just wrote it down. Then they took pictures and then brought it back to the group, and we looked at them together. And it was amazing results because some people saw things they hadn't realized they were teaching. And they were pretty excited, and they went right into their learning objectives for the next time they taught it, and then they were going to be explicit with their students that that's what they're learning. Other people didn't see some stuff they thought they had been teaching, never showed up at all. And then they thought, uh-oh, I better teach to this specifically and be able to, articulate, have the students be able to articulate what they. And it was different. The community college was very different from the elite liberal arts college in what the students thought they got out of it. The community college students were saying, I learned how important it was to read the text. I learned how important it was to show up for class. I mean, these were important things for them. They learned other things as well. In other faculty members at other kinds of institutions documented other things. But it was the first time for everybody in that room that they had ever done an exercise like this. They came up with it themselves. It was really useful. They used it every time they taught. After that, they found it really useful, and I recommend it as an exercise. We can take a hard look at our courses and ask ourselves, what are we already doing? Are we teaching students to do research, to synthesize sources, to weigh the value of conflicting information, to tolerate ambiguity, to work in groups, present information on paper, aloud, with graphics, make arguments backed up by credible sources, tell when a source is credible? There's a lot we can do, both in advising and in regular coursework, to help our students see pathways for themselves. We have material at the MLA to help. Ask me about all our professional development resources. We have great stuff on AI and student writing. People are doing this work already. You don't have to reduplicate it. You can, steal from others, please. I've mentioned the National Humanities Alliance as well. Lots of resources there, studythehumanities.org. There's no need to start from scratch. If we make clear to our students how prepared they can be with a humanities background for entering careers, if we articulate the skills, values, and perspectives they're taking. I never just talk about skills. I always talk about skills, values, and perspectives. that you get from humanities courses, the three together. Because, and value, and I say values, and I'm clear when I talk about values, it is about students learning to articulate their own values, to locate their own values. It's not about us giving them values. It's about them understanding their own values. Anyway, if they can articulate those three things, we're preparing them to tell employers how they think and who they are, in addition to what they can do. So how they think and who they are, not just I can do this. Okay? We're preparing them for a lifetime of jobs and not just the first one. Well, I won't trash any other majors. Okay. Perhaps then we can contribute to changing the narrative about the humanities and their utility. Because students don't just want a job, they want self-respect, they want meaningful lives, and our courses give them not just skills, but values and perspectives that help them make sense of the world and help them make the right choices for their careers. And that is not to say they don't expect to get paid after they graduate. And that's a message we have to reinforce. They do get paid. The American Academy of Arts and Sciences Humanities Indicators Project, which you should all have bookmarked, humanitiesindicators.org, for all the kind of references you need to show people that they will not be baristas when they graduate. The average salary for a humanities bachelor degree holder was over $2,000 a year than the average salary for a life sciences degree holder. Humanities higher salary than life sciences degree holder. It's counterintuitive, but we got the data. They get the jobs. Their unemployment rates are just the same as everybody else. They're just the same. And you can get the state-by-state unemployment rate. You can find out from humanitiesindicators.org. They have that information for every state. They get better jobs. This is the underemployment rate. The underemployment rate is for first job out, people who say that their job reflects their education, what they learned in their undergraduate majors. So again, English majors get better jobs, first out the gate. Then these biology majors are not getting jobs in biology. Psychology majors are not getting jobs in psychology. Business majors, I don't know what's with them. Of course they're getting jobs in business, but anyway. Take a look at the data. A huge percentage of humanities majors go on to get an advanced degree or credential in something. A huge percent, way over 40% of humanities majors get an advanced degree or credential in something else. Mostly it's not the humanities. Mostly it's, an MSW or an MBA or a certificate in cybersecurity or something like that. When they go on and get an advanced degree or credential, they increase their annual earnings by an average of $23,000. Yeah. It's also important to note that humanities majors with advanced degrees are represented across more occupational categories than any other degree holders. They are represented across the job spectrum. So if you major in the humanities, you are much more likely to get a job in the sciences than anybody who majors in the sciences is likely to get a job in the humanities. People in the humanities are equipped to pursue the widest range of vocations. That's true at the graduate level, but I just want to take another brief story. I'm going to keep doing this, I'm sorry. One time I was walking out of my building at Bridgewater State. I saw the business dean and the science dean, and they were getting into a car together. I knew that was trouble. So I said, where are you guys going? And they said, we're going to Cisco Systems. I said, what for? And I said, well, we're going to talk to the recruiter there. I said, well, why didn't you invite me? And they said, well, we didn't think you'd be interested. And I said, move over. So I went with them. And we're there, and the recruiter is talking about his entering class of engineers, Cisco Systems network engineering, okay? So he's talking about his entering class of network engineers, 35 people in the class. And I said, well, what does a good network engineer do? And he said, oh, they they ask questions to figure out what the problem is, and then try a solution, and then that doesn't work, so they ask a better question, try that solution. Then they ask, and I said, well, holy crap, do you have to be an engineer to do that? And he said, oh, no, these are not all engineers. I said, well, are there any humanities majors, in your class of engineers? And he said, what's that? Right? So I told him, he said, oh, yeah, we got people who major in history and, Spanish or whatever. I said, well, when you go to the career services office and you start recruiting for network engineers, nobody from the humanities is going to think they can apply for that job. You have to talk differently about what you're looking for in order to get the best applicants for this. I could not see French majors going in and applying for network engineer jobs. They have to talk about what qualities are you looking for? What kind of person are you looking for? What is this job? Describe what the job is. It was very frustrating. And then, of course, I had to come back and tell all the department chairs, there are these great jobs for people who are like this so that they could talk to their majors about it. I want to move to research. Okay. If we want to know how seriously, sorry about that abrupt segue, how seriously our expertise is taken in a country or at a university, we need to look at how research is funded. Of course, we know scientific research is more expensive than language or literature research. Just ask any dean about startup packages in the sciences, versus the ones you get to give. But we're not talking about the size of grants for humanities research. We're talking about the very existence of grants for humanities research. Not the size of them, but the fact, are there any grants for humanities research? From the federal government. Then there's Mellon. In 2024, the NSF budget was $9.06 billion in 2024. The NIH budget was $47.1 billion. The NEH's budget was $211 million. Okay, that's an M. All right, that's what that looks like. Okay, that's what that looks like. See that? There is a line there. Okay, that's, again, as Ron said, under 0.4% of the national research budget. It's less than that, less than half of that even, because the NEH, most of the money that it spends, it doesn't spend on humanities research. It spends on state humanities councils and on infrastructure kind of issues, and somebody's got to fund that stuff, I guess. So very little of the NEH budget actually goes to humanities research. As Christopher Newfield's research notes, we can compare our percentage of federal research funding to our neighbors. Canada combines social sciences and the humanities, in their funding. Together, they make up 13% of the national research budget. If we combine them in the US, social sciences and humanities, we get 1.7%. So Canada 13, us 1.7. We can't do a head-to-head humanities comparison because they're mushed together. Mexico, however, does separate out the humanities in their national research budget. Mexico gives 15% of its national research budget to the humanities. 15%. Okay? We give 0.4%. 15% versus 0.4%. I'm going to give you the NIH, NSF, NEH numbers again in a pie chart because I like pie charts. See that little slice here? That's us. That's us there. Like that. Okay. I want to move back to the question of humanities expertise. In the sciences, we recognize a distinction between basic and applied research. But the general public has a hard time with understanding the value of basic research. Research that enters a critical conversation among specialists and isn't public-facing, or not yet, anyway. Not all research in the sciences has to lead to a patent, although it's starting to look that way. Okay. But let me illustrate in the humanities the difference between basic and applied humanities with an example. English professor Tricia Matthew from Montclair State University in New Jersey wrote widely in the popular press about the Bridgerton series. She wrote in the LARB, in the online magazine Slate, Times Literary Supplement. And, there's an article of hers in the LARB, lovely illustration. Tricia was interviewed for podcasts. She recorded a lecture for Audible. She was recognized nationally and internationally as an expert and authority on race and the Regency. Where did her ability to write smart, informed critique of a television show come from? Why did people want to read her and talk to her about it? Because she made herself an expert by years of study. Because she has a PhD in English, because her research and her teaching topics include abolition and sugar and ceramics in the late 18th and early 19th century, and the novel, the development of the novel, and women novelists. And she uses her deep research in academic publications. She has done that. She has published those articles. In general education teaching, okay, she doesn't have PhD students. She teaches this stuff in gen ed courses and in early courses in the major, and she credits her teaching with advancing her thinking on these topics, and she uses that research and education as well in her public-facing writing. She blends it all together in a new lab she runs on race and the Regency. She did not just happen to be a smart television watcher. We have to make the public understand that humanities expertise is a thing. It's a thing. It's not just a smart, person. It's somebody who has studied, who has expertise, who has spent years to make themselves an expert, to put them in the position to be public-facing on this issue. Just as medical research can't progress without basic research, social and cultural criticism needs basic research first. Tricia Matthews, my example, but plenty of other folks, including folks here, are making these connections. Applying humanities research to community-engaged work. But I want to make clear that I'm not arguing that all discovery research needs to be public-facing. Not all discovery work needs to lead to application. We have to stand up for the value of research in our fields as well. I'm arguing for the support of the creation of knowledge in the humanities. One more brief story. I was at Pace University last year at an event about humanities research. Humanities research, this event was about. You had Shelley Lowe, who's the chair of the NEH, and Tony Marks. Anybody know who that is? He's the president of the New York Public Library, okay, former president of Amherst College. So he says in this event about humanities research, well, I'm going to say something provocative here. I feel like the humanities have brought it on themselves. They've got all this specialist, jargon and language, and they're, just talking to each other. And it was a big room, or I would have been more of a problem. But I waited until afterwards, and I said to him, I want to take issue with what you said. We said, well, I was trying to be provocative. I said, well, you were. I said, would you say that to a physicist? Would you tell a scientist that they shouldn't use specialized language and write to each other in journals? That everything they wrote and did needed to be public-facing? He said, well, I didn't think of it that way. I said, well, you think of it that way. I was pissed. This man is the head of one of the nation's premier research collections, and he thinks humanists shouldn't be writing to each other in specialized language. Okay. Valuing language in literature, research, and education means recognizing that the knowledge we create is valuable, in a range of contexts, specialized and non-specialized. And what our graduate students learn can lead to a range of different kinds of careers. The content of their coursework and their research is at the heart of their degrees, of course. But they create knowledge as well as a result of their teaching, curriculum design, and what they learn about higher ed structures and systems. They're participating in knowledge creation. We in higher ed need to get more directed about acknowledging all that learning and facilitating it. In our PhD programs, we need to offer research methods training in community-engaged research, not just in writing for publication in a research journal. We need to introduce graduate students to the scholarship of teaching and learning so that if they go into a career at a teaching-intensive institution, they will know how to maintain a research practice at that institution. If you're teaching at a community college, the research you're doing is student-focused. It is focused on your students and their learning, almost inevitably. And if you have not been trained to do that, you may think you can't do research ever. We have to get better about that in graduate programs. We need to set up assistantships beyond the teaching or research assistantship, advising in dean's offices and career offices or admissions. You graduate students, any graduate students? A couple, okay. If you have a side hustle, think about what it says about what you like to do with your life. And think about how your PhD could help you do something that you love, that you may already be doing. Ask me afterwards about my own career trajectory, okay, and the side roads and the how it led here instead of after a tenure track job, but it might have led here without that even if I had paid more attention. With the current threats against higher education and against the things we in the humanities value and teach, especially the values of equity, anti-racism, and the extension of opportunity to those who have been excluded, we need to make a better case for our work. We can give students the tools to talk to their families about how our majors and courses set them up for success after graduation. We can talk to our communications offices and our government relations offices about what research skills and analytical skills enable our students to achieve during their studies and after. And we can make that clear across campus as well. We need to work with our colleagues in social sciences, the arts, tech, natural and physical sciences, and business to show the importance of humanities perspectives to the work they're undertaking, especially the applied work. And I know you're doing some of that already here. When we work with our community partners, it helps to be explicit about the value of humanities research and training to enlist them as supporters of what we do, in addition to helping support what they do. Jennifer Feather, I don't know if anybody knows her, she's at UNCG, an early modernist who has worked on violent masculinities in early modern texts. She connects that work to her work at a community placemaking action lab in Greensboro, which uses theater to help communities explore themes of violence. Okay. Every community group she works with and every community group you work with should understand the value of bringing humanities research to the table. The time for making connections between our research and our communities, and thus building community support for that research, is yesterday. We can't expect parents, journalists, or even our colleagues to intuit our value or trust us when we assert it. Our student events must be loud and proud. We must trumpet our research successes. We can help our students make connections between their humanities coursework and their career aspirations. We can name and document the skills, values, and perspectives they take from our courses. We can introduce them to alumni who loved their majors and now love their lives and understand the connections between the two. Faculty members haven't been trained in any of this. We didn't learn in graduate school that we have to be concerned with our students' career outcomes. Nobody taught us how to recruit and retain students, how to work with admissions offices or career services. But many of you are doing that work already anyway, because guess what? You're really good at learning. You know how to learn. Now more than ever, we have to make the case nationally for language and literature, for higher education itself, and help you make the case locally for the value of research in our fields, for the creation of humanities knowledge, and the deployment of humanities skills. Our students do love what they get to do, and the nation needs what we do. Together, we have to stand up for the value of humanities expertise. We have to describe it, cite it, and call for it in every context: climate change, AI, guns, immigration, Taylor Swift. You believe in it, or you wouldn't have pursued the degrees you did. So let's assert the value of what we believe and become evangelists in this increasingly divided world for the work that helps us to understand the importance of reading, viewing, listening, interpreting, and studying the textual and the human world around us. Supporting languages, literatures, and cultures was a topic I chose months ago when I was asked to give this talk, and I don't think any of us could have imagined at that time how much higher the stakes would become. Thank you. That was long, I know. If you have to go, go ahead.
So there's a bit of time there for some.
And you can talk to me in person and email me as well. Yeah.
That was a talk full of all sorts of facts and articles and uplifting and depressing. I have a question about ISIS.
Yeah.
I guess I want to frame this by, a couple of years ago there was, you know, the New York article about the crisis in humanities, and Jeff Cohen, he said, we'll put in this conversation campus. I guess that conversation hasn't sort of continued the way that I sort of had in mind. That's a more local kind of issue. I think the day or two after the article in the New York Times about problems with the Common Core curriculum, which had been, I guess, instituted in the Obama administration. Since then, there's been lots of news about, even in the elite college, in my undergrads have never read a full novel. Don't know how to. And, we go on. When I was an undergrad, I was expected to do this much in my classes every week, and how much can I assign my undergrads, for a week here. And so on. And so clearly, there's, I'm impressed on a weekly basis with how little my undergrads know. And I'm sure that they know a ton of other things, but they don't necessarily have the kind of background in the humanities and literature that some of this is just a change in hand, and some of this is a real crisis of knowledge. And I want to know how you see that factoring into this situation.
I thought you were going to ask about high schools and outreach to high schools and ways you can work with high schools to recruit majors and stuff. It's
sure, but
no,
I'm a little more. I suppose before we get there, I'm interested in what is the situation in high schools and how that contributes to all of these things.
I think the Common Core was a problem. I mean, they asked us for input, the MLA. We gave input. They ignored every single thing we said, and we have what we have. And you saw, it's not about imaginative literature, it's about, comprehending small chunks and stuff. So I think your job is to make the students succeed, that our students bring a range of things to our classrooms that we ignore and that we don't run with at all, and empower and enable them to apply their analytical skills to that one thing I say sometimes in campus talks is, if you're teaching or assigning the same kinds of assignments that you had as an undergraduate yourself or a graduate student, it's no wonder your students are not succeeding with them. And people say to me, I do not know how to tell my students, how to teach my students how to build a website or do a podcast instead of a 7 to 10 page analytical paper. And that's why I always assign 7 to 10 page analytical papers. And I say, do you teach your students how to type? No, but you demand that they type what they hand into you. Your job isn't to teach them to type, but it may be to get them to use what they are good at and what they're familiar with, to be able to develop the skills that you would like them to develop. Maybe, I think back, I look at exams for, English majors from, 100 years ago, and there's no way I with a PhD could pass a BA exam, from then. Nor would I want to, nor do I think I would be a better person if I could pass that exam. So I think our job as teachers is to think about where are the students, where do we want them to get in relation to the lives they're going to lead. Who has some assignments here that take advantage of things that students bring to class that may not be the ability to read an entire novel? What do you do?
Well, you said typing is one of them. If you don't learn how to do that, it's going to take quite a while unless you can dictate with voice recognition.
But all right, so what kinds of stuff are you asking?
Well, for example, the final project has 3 options: a YouTube channel, a blog, or an academic final paper. Mm-hmm. Because, they come with different interests and affordances and abilities. Mm-hmm. Some of them say, oh, I'm going to do the academic paper. This is what I'm comfortable with. I don't know how to make a blog. I don't know how to make a YouTube channel.
Yeah. There's a YouTube channel to teach them how to do that. But yeah.
That's my example.
Yeah. Good. Anybody else? Yeah, what do you got?
I have a creative assignment that I give them a choice. They can write, they can record, they can create a script, like the comic script. Mm-hmm. Most of them decide to write because it's just faster, I guess. Mm-hmm. But I had some students that recorded their assignment. So
we're focusing on assessment, which I think is the way I usually focus on this. And that's not what you asked about, and that's interesting. So what you're interested in is, I want to teach a novel. They don't know how to read a novel. What do I do with that?
I'd be happy if I could read a 20-page short story.
Okay.
Or if they did read it, if they read it, they can do it. They can talk about it intelligently. I think a lot of what you say resonates with me in terms of the amount of humanistic research out there in popular culture. I didn't understand kind of from our, but I go on to various different.
When I first started teaching full-time at Wheaton College, a small liberal arts college in Massachusetts, and I'm a Victorianist, and I was teaching in memoriam, which I just love. I find it so moving, and so there was like no reaction in the room. It was awful, and I went out to lunch with one of my colleagues, and I had a beer. It was lunch. I don't usually have a beer at lunch, but I said, look, I taught in memoriam, and they just didn't like it. And she said, Paula, they didn't read it. and it hadn't occurred to me, but it was true. So then I organized a reading. We had a reading from start to finish of In Memoriam in a room in the student union. I got pizza for everybody. It took 4.5 hours. And they could come and go as they pleased. And some students stayed the whole time, and we just took turns reading it. It was so amazing. You can't do that with everything, but I just had to start trying to think about other ways of engaging them in this text that meant so much to me. I don't want to just, beat this horse forever, but I just want anybody else have a question? Is that a question back there? Or you're just nodding, enthusiastic. I appreciate that. Go ahead. Yeah.
First off, thank you so much for your presentation. There's a lot of really interesting information in there. And you touched a lot about this idea of how interconnected everything is and how language and culture, and I think you mentioned we can't teach language without culture. A lot of language teachers are here as students from Silicon, and I was wondering if you talk a little bit more. You mentioned some concrete things as well, but a little bit more about how we might be able to make those connections concretely within our department, not just within our department, but also within the university. Things that we can also be doing to try and make study of language and culture more apparent and more visible?
You know, we-
talk a little bit more about that.
The MLA every 5 years or so does a language enrollment census where we track all colleges, all enrollments in all language classes. It's a snapshot survey, and we have a over 90% return rate. It's absolutely accurate, and so we watch what happens. And recently, of course, it's been sliding. You know, language enrollments have been sliding as language requirements have gone away. I mean, it's absolutely, you know, a correlation there. And so we started tracking where enrollments are going up and preparing case studies on the ones that are going up so that people could see. And what we're seeing is a lot of the places where language enrollments are rising are where the language is part of larger majors or concentrations, border studies kinds of things, you know. I'm trying to think of what the case studies that we had were, well, Native Hawaiian stuff that works in the community, that programs where the connection is made between the language and culture and community need and political issues, social issues in a community. Those are you know, or particular immigrant needs, you know, in the community. Those are the places where it's rising. And they're capitalizing sometimes on heritage language learners, and but those are the places where, and frankly, where institutions invest in language learning, because languages do not rise, oddly enough, if you cut lines. You know, you're not going to get more enrollments if you have fewer classes, and this is not a lesson that everybody learns. But that's, you know, go back to our most recent language enrollment survey. It's free online, and look at some of the case studies and look at where some of the rise is happening. And the Korean is self-explanatory in some ways. It's there. I have a friend at University of Georgia, and she had a colleague who was teaching Korean, and he had these two kind of white farm boy, you know, twins who were in his Korean class. And he said to them, why are you guys, you know, majoring in Korean? And they said, well, you know, when we were growing up, you know, in our town where we come from there's a Korean car manufacturer there. And he said, and I thought, oh, they see a utility, they want to get a job. He said, but that wasn't the end of the story. There's a Korean car manufacturer there, and the kids of the employees came to our high school, and we became friends with them, and we got really fascinated with Korean culture, and so we majored in Korean. You know, so then the university started, you know, doing some outreach to take advantage of that kind of thing. Yeah, sure. Other questions?
Well, you mentioned your own background and talking a little bit about the kind of didn't have. When I was in grad school at Indiana, we had a reading group, a feminist criticism reading group, and it was faculty members and grad students, and it was really exciting. It was like the early days. We're talking the 80s, right? So it was very heady days for this stuff. It was just coming out. We're reading it all. And a bunch of us realized that we were doing that, reading that stuff together, and it was very exciting. But for a living, we were TAing, right? We were teaching. And there was never anything about pedagogy. I thought, where's the feminist pedagogy, you know? And so we decided, it was like an Andy Rooney, you know, thing. You know, let's put on a show. So we decided to start a magazine. We started a magazine called Feminist Teacher. And I worked at the local newspaper. So I would go in at midnight after the shifts were over and the compositors were there, typesetters were there, and I would give them text, and they would print it out for me, and on strips, you know. Nobody here has any clue what I'm talking about, but they would be these strips like columns of newspaper print, and then we'd take it back to the office, the grad student office, and we had wax. Okay, you'd melt wax, and you'd wax up the back of these strips, and you'd lay it out, and we design. So, and I would go to the National Women's Studies Association convention and sell subscriptions to this. They were $12. Okay, I would go
And I would grab these women as they were walking by. I would get a booth, right? And they would walk by and I would say, are you a teacher? Because of course they were a teacher. They were at the National Women's Studies Association convention, right? They say, yes. I said, are you a feminist? Well, of course they were a feminist. I said, well, you need this magazine, right? You need this. So when I sold enough subscriptions to pay to print the thing and mail it, then we would print an issue, right? Okay. So we did this as grad students. And then I got a job because the school said, hey, could you use editorial assistants from undergraduates? I said, absolutely. So I got hired partly on the strength of that. They gave me a course release to edit the thing. We had an editorial collective, but we took turns being managing editor. They gave me a course release to do this and have undergraduates help me with it. And so side gig, helped me get full-time job, right? So I'm in this job and I'm publishing this thing and it's good and fun. And I was a sports writer. That's what I was doing at that newspaper. I put myself through college and grad school as a sports writer. And so I knew how to write to deadline. I knew how to edit. And so a job opened up for editor of Academe, the AAUP's national magazine. It's a bi-monthly magazine. And I already knew how to do that, so I applied and I got it, and it was course release. And so now I've got this bully pulpit, right? National, magazine I can design and get people to write for and stuff. That was very empowering. I was very full of myself when I was doing that job. I thought it was very important. And so I did that for a number of years, and I was department chair. And when I was department chair, I got involved in the Association of Departments of English, which is part of the MLA, the professional development part. And I was sorry, this is going on forever, but I will try to cut it really fast. So I got involved with the ADE. I was put on an ad hoc committee on the status of African-American faculty members in English departments. So this committee will do a ton of reading and we figure out, all right, what's the problem? Okay. So the problem was not that PhDs who were Black were not getting jobs. They were getting jobs. The problem wasn't that there weren't any Black undergraduates. There were plenty of Black undergraduates. The problem was, one of the problems was nobody was encouraging African-American undergraduates to go into PhD programs, or if they were not helping them succeed in PhD programs. Okay, so we said, all right, we need a bridge program. Need a bridge program to help students figure out how to get into PhD programs if they want to get into PhD programs. So we did that. And so we figured this out. And the whole committee's like, yes, we need a bridge program. And everybody's looking at everybody else. And I'm like, we need to apply for a grant for this. And everybody's like, yeah, we need to. I was like, all right. So I applied to Mellon. I got my first Mellon grant. And then you get a taste for it, right? You're like, wow, I can make something happen with other people's money, So then I figured out how to, always having side things that were the thing you cared about, but that you might not be able to devote all your time to in your regular job. How can you make that work? And then I had a taste for national stuff, So anyway, I ended up here. Thank you for asking. That's a very self-indulgent answer. I'm sorry, but there's a lesson somewhere in that. I know I've kept you forever, so thank you very, very much.